I'll tell you what, let's talk about Representative Ilhan Omar and the senator from Tennessee, this crazy Christian fascist, Marsha Blackburn. Representative Omar says that Senator Blackburn has put a target on campus protesters across the United States because of what Marsha Blackburn and a couple of her Christian fascist colleagues have been saying about the peaceful protests, the people who are protesting the slaughter of innocent people. You know, to Marsha Blackburn and some of these other son of a bitches, Rick Scott, who else? Tom Cotton, Josh Hawley, these Christian fascist son of a bitches, they don't see Palestinians as being fully human. I can only imagine how they see Representative Omar, who I believe is the only Palestinian American who serves in the U.S. Congress. But this past week, she asked her colleagues in the House to condemn the latest Christian fascist threat against the thousands of university students and faculty members who have been protesting our complicity in what Israel has done to the civilian population of Gaza, and she might as well include the West Bank too. And then Omar asked for that consideration after Blackburn suggested that the protesters in this country, college students, have, quote, promoted terrorism, end quote. Now, this sounds like it's right out of the mouth of Bull Connor back in the 1960s. So here's Marsha Blackburn saying that peaceful college students, and they were peaceful, I'll get to that in a second, were promoting terrorism because they were demonstrating against U.S. complicity in the slaughter engineered by Benjamin Netanyahu against the civilian population of Gaza. So they're now terrorists, huh? And Blackburn called for the student protesters to be surveilled by the federal government. She said this, Blackburn did. Now, you know, she's identified as a Republican senator. She's a Christian fascist senator of the highest order. But this is what she said, quote, any student who has promoted terrorism or engaged in terrorist acts on behalf of Hamas should be immediately added to the terrorist watch list and placed on the no-fly list, end quote. I mean, these fucking people are just goddamn insane. Promoted terrorism or engaged in terrorist acts to Marsha Blackburn means building an encampment on university property and handing out literature and chanting and parading up and down with signs that say, stop U.S. complicity, stop the killing. That's terrorism to these Christian devils. Now, her comments, Blackburn's comments, came about 2 weeks after a solitary encampment set up by students at Columbia. And, of course, the subsequent arrest of more than 100 participants, suspending students from classes. But it's been about 2 weeks since that action taken at Columbia galvanized students at dozens of schools around the country and around the world, for that matter. And the call of these students is for the U.S. to divest from Israel, not just the U.S. government, but the universities to begin with, and for the U.S. to cut off military funding for Israel. I mean, what is wrong with that? Seriously. Now, to me, divestment, I realize I'm not in step with the college students, but to me, divestment means not participating in any kind of military contracts, the building of military weaponry, or supporting financially any activity that could be considered aggressive. You know, we Americans don't understand something, a very essential reality. The Palestinians consider their country to be occupied by an invading force. The Israelis, who now they're called Israelis, but before the establishment of the State of Israel, they were called Russians, South Africans, Americans, English, French, Bulgarian, Kazakhstan. I mean, that's where the Jews emigrated from in order to assist in the establishment of the State of Israel. So the Palestinians feel, I mean, I guess there's no point getting into my attempt to talk about how the Palestinians feel. What the hell do I know? But I know what I've read. And what I've read is that the Palestinians have no question that their country was invaded by people who didn't belong there. Oh, yeah, you can go back to a holy text of one of the three major religions that burped up out of that part of the world. And the holy text will say, I, God, give you this land. This is yours. And if you choose to believe that, I mean, who's going to shake your belief? Who's going to say, wait a second. In the first place, you really believe that some hairy thunderer or bearded creature in the sky ordered this? By what, 5,000 years ago? 6? What? Now, since Columbia erupted, more than 1,000 students, educators, and other supporters have been arrested across the country. And there are videos now that are all over social media. Some of them have been on various newscasts that show the nasty, aggressive police responses at schools, including here in Atlanta at Emory University. In St. Louis, it was Washington University. In Austin, Texas, University of Texas. And this kind of action on the part of the cops, I'm beginning to believe that the average cop loves nothing more than to beat the shit out of some kid who is a student protesting. What is that? I mean, that's how I felt back in the late 60s, early 70s. I really did. I had the feeling that the police enjoyed this, enjoyed beating people up. If you look at the film footage from the 68 Chicago Democratic Convention in Chicago, and if you see the looks on some of the faces, this was before the police departments around the country went totally militarized. In 1968, cops still look like cops. I mean, they didn't show up with armor and submachine guns and tanks and shit. No, they showed up to beat the shit out of protesters. They showed up with nightsticks and clubs. There was no tasers back then. There was gas. There was pepper spray, I guess. But all these new military-style weapons that had been developed and given to police departments, they weren't available in 68. So the cops would just wade in to huge crowds of protesting students who were protesting the Democratic Convention because Hubert Humphrey refused to declare that he would be absolutely, adamantly against the continuation of the war in Vietnam. The Democratic Convention in 68 was run by the warmongers. And so the students were protesting that and other situations, the racism, the murder of Black Panthers, all kinds of things were going on in the country. So the cops would wade in with these huge nightsticks. And without warning, just start clubbing people, beating the hell out of people. So now we have the situation in Israel, in Gaza, and the students are protesting all these years later. Almost, I mean, it's over 50 years later. What, 1968 was what? 55 years ago? 56 years ago? Representative Omar said that Senator Blackburn's comments were, quote, insanely dangerous. And Senator Blackburn, this Christian nutcase, had previously denounced the protesters as, I like the use of her two words. She first called them unruly. In the next sentence, she said they were terrorist sympathizers. Unruly. terrorist sympathizers. Jesus Christ. And numerous reports, news reports, eyewitness reports have described how the anti-war protests had been peaceful until police officers began violently arresting. How often does this happen? The attendees. Well, opponents have shared, quote, escalating unhinged calls to crack down on the demonstrators, end quote. Crack down on them, beat them, call American college students terrorists and terrorist sympathizers. Go ahead. That's a good idea, isn't it? Huh? That makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? You know, one thing is becoming crystal clear. I talked about this last week. Biden is going to lose this election. Now, I realize we're 6-7 months out. But what and where he's going to lose it is going to be in the so-called youth vote. I have a college student that's home, my daughter. And I think next week I will see if I can get her on the podcast here to talk about what she's experiencing as a college student while this is going on. I've had talks with her over the phone over the past 6 weeks, 5 weeks, however long it's been. I talked with her about the horror that's been going on in Gaza since last October. I talked with her about the incursion by the Hamas terrorists into southern Israel, all of it. There's nothing that Molly and I don't discuss if it's, pertinent either to her education or to what's going on in the world. I guess she's cursed by having had me as a father all these years, where it was absolutely imperative that I kept a conversation going about current events and the horror of it all, and why it seems like American leadership just dissolves when it's most needed.
Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. You know, the Progressive Voices Network brings you commercial-free commentary from today's leading progressive radio hosts and pundits, like me, Mike Malloy, 24 hours a day. I'm not your typical old guy from the 80s or the 90s talk radio host, and Progressive Voices is not your typical talk radio network. It's a listener-supported nonprofit with no corporate control whatsoever over our broadcast. So hosts like me, Mike Malloy, are free to rant and scream and carry on about whatever we like. We're often controversial, but we're never boring. Weeknights, 9 p.m. in the East, 6 p.m. in the West on the Progressive Voices Network. Always progressive, always on. I'm Mike Malloy. Keep it lit.